Hello tanks and tankettes, and welcome back to World of Tanks and a viewer replay. This is My Name is Puffs in Jabba the Tank, aka the Oh-Ho. And if you're wondering why I call it that, well, that's a very old reference, because it's the oh. Anyway, I've done a little bit of light editing on this particular replay because this isn't the fastest tank in the world, and on this particular map it involves rather a lot of driving uphill, and so rather than make you watch the entire first 2.5 minutes of just driving extremely slowly up to the top of the hill, I've cut out one or two little bits here and there. This isn't the only Japanese super heavy on the team either. You might have noticed there's also a Type 5 here, so there's definitely a bit of a derp theme going on with at least some of the team, because they've also got an FE 4005, although the enemy team does as well. So it's not like the enemy team is entirely devoid of large derp guns, it's just this team has a few more of them. So this isn't necessarily a great position for this tank. I mean, this is just not a great map for this tank overall, because it is, much like all the other Japanese super heavies, basically a giant premium magnet. The more heavily armoured tanks are generally anyway, but depending on exactly what tank you're in, you might have a better chance of actually bouncing some of that ammo, but not so much the Japanese heavies, just because they feature rather large swathes of flat armour that really can't do much to resist the shells. The turret fronts especially. I mean, I don't think the Type 5's that bad, but the Oh-Ho is a bit vulnerable in that regard. However, with the derp gun in return, he doesn't really need to go for weak spots, he doesn't really need to try and hit vulnerable areas, he just needs to hit to do some damage. But of course, the downside is that isn't necessarily going to do huge amounts of damage at once. If he gets lucky though, he will do things like damage guns and damage optics and things like that, which might slightly degrade the performance of the enemies firing at him. Guns especially, if you can turn somebody's gun yellow and force them to use their repair kit, then, you know, if you manage to do it again at that point, they can't hit you as reliably. I'll also point out, because a lot of the replays from tanks I've featured recently have had at least some use of premium ammo, there is no use of premium ammo in this game whatsoever. I think on this tank it is heat shells for this gun, for this particular derp, but for, of course, the Type 4 and the Type 5, somewhat controversially, in fact very controversially, the premium ammo is just straight up better HE. It does more damage. I think it does less penetration, but with the derp gun, of course, that doesn't matter. It did, though, slightly get me thinking about how life could have been different if way back when Wargaming had decided to design their premium ammo such that it was it did additional damage but had lower penetration, as opposed to the proposed change, the one that they're going to try out, which is increased penetration but reduced damage, and that will have some knock-on effects of its own. I suspect at the very least we'll be seeing super heavies like these get reduced amounts of hit points to compensate, but it'll be a bit of a process to actually test that, I expect. So of all the tanks that came up here, there has been a considerable thinning out. It's now just these two Japanese super heavies and the Pattern. We've also got some enemies now pushing their way across the middle upper field, which is a bit of a concern, because although he has taken some damage, and it's all been premium ammo, maybe unsurprisingly, he's also managed to bounce one shell at least, and there's a much less good chance of that if people have access to the extremely flat side armour. The Type 5 is faring about the same. They've also lost about half their health, and they're also doing some damage in the process, but I think they've been taking the brunt of the artillery attention up till now, so that's been working out in Puff's favour. Talking of attention and doing damage. He's up to 2.5k himself. He's actually going to do alright out of this game. I don't think any of the hits have been individually spectacular apart from nailing that charioteer. But the even just the couple of hundred damage at a time hits, you know, it adds up. And he has been managing to hit the majority of his shots, despite the not particularly fast aiming nature of this gun. So there's that Progetto now having a go, and he's able to react and angle in time. And that shot, yeah, that shot is worthy of a Soviet derp gun. I genuinely laughed out loud the first time watching this replay, just because, I mean, sometimes RNG will give you those kind of shots, even with the more inaccurate guns in game, and it's always the more hilarious when it's the more inaccurate guns. So yeah, he just casually turned the turret, let fly a shot, which by all rights should not have connected, but due to the nature of RNG, completely blatted that Progetto. Not so amusing for the Progetto, but quite amusing for us who are watching. So after this long, slow war of attrition, we have a bunch of very damaged tanks, but Puffs still has a decent amount of health at this point, and the enemy team, well, they don't have a lot of tanks left at all. All of the defending tank destroyers who were lurking in the tree line were able to do sufficient amount of damage to anybody trying to cross, and Puffs himself also, of course, managed to nail a couple of tanks good and proper who were trying to cross the middle. And it seems like that's just about it for the enemy team. All that's left is now this E75, who isn't really that much of a threat. Puffs can just keep whacking him, there we go, in the turret, and it really only took one hit. That was quite a good one, actually. 409 damage to the turret face, with the last tiny little bit of health being taken off by artillery. And that just leaves the enemy arty and the T-28. And if he's lucky, he might actually get a hit on the T-28. Because, well, we know where they are, and it's a T-28. Even these days, it's not going to have gotten that far that quickly. So he tries for a shot over the side of the tank, where his gun depression is a little bit better, but the terrain doesn't allow it, so he's going to actually have to climb up onto the edge and see if he can do get a better shot that way, and also maybe not accidentally nail the Scorpion G on his own team, because I have a feeling like an accidental hit into that particular ally would maybe not have a good consequence. But as it is, he basically hits the front of the tank for not a lot of damage, but it's still a little bit of extra damage. The standard B then clears up the remaining artillery, and that's the game. So it was a bit of a bruiser, but it really did show off, I think, what the super heavies are at least in theory supposed to do, which is be on the front lines and just keep slugging away until the enemy is dead, whilst taking a thorough battering of their own all the while. And it would be great if every match was like that, but, you know, with premium ammo being what it is, generally speaking, when you're in the super heavies, sometimes all those hit points and all that armor really does just not count for anything. You just die in a hail of premium ammo, and that's that. But I guess because of where they were able to use the terrain a bit. They did have the backing of allies, and so the enemy tanks maybe didn't get quite the free ride that they might have on other maps. So having said, you know, maybe not the best map for this particular tank, the actual position in the end that he ended up in, along with that Type 5, it kind of worked out. So hopefully you have enjoyed this relatively quick replay, and if you have, you can do all the usual things down underneath the video, and of course, as always, stay tuned for more.